Emily Ashford learned the art of being invisible long before she understood how painful it was to live that way. For 7 years, she moved quietly through the halls of Thornhill Manor, unnoticed and unremembered, like a shadow that belonged to the walls themselves. Servants passed her without greeting. The family she served barely glanced at her face. Even her name seemed to fade the moment it was spoken. That autumn morning, with cold rain beating against the tall windows, Emily stood in the morning room polishing silver, unaware that before the day ended, her life would break open in a way she never imagined. The work was steady and familiar, cloth against metal, the dull shine becoming bright again. Emily found comfort in repetition. It allowed her thoughts to drift far from the grand house that was never truly her home. Few people knew that before she became a maid, she had lived a very different life. Her father had been a scholar, a translator who spoke several languages with ease. Their small cottage had once been filled with books and candlelight, with foreign words spoken softly into the night. He taught her everything he knew, not out of ambition, but love. Then he died. A fever took him in 3 days. Emily was 17, alone and penniless. Thornhill Manor needed a scullery maid, and she needed food. That was how her life among the invisible began. Over time, she worked her way up to housemaid, though the change meant little more than cleaner hands and access to brighter rooms. The Duke of Blackwood never noticed servants. To him, they were part of the house itself, necessary but unseen. He was 38 that year, tall and severe, with dark hair always neatly kept and eyes that revealed nothing. He had inherited Thornhill at 21 and turned it into a place of strict order and cold efficiency. Emily had seen him smile only twice in 7 years. That morning, as she finished her work and moved toward the library, raised voices echoed through the entrance hall. Emily froze. The Duke did not allow shouting in his home. Instinct told her to walk away. A good servant knew when not to hear, but something in the sharp tension of the voices held her still. 3 men stood in the hall. The Duke faced them stiffly. Beside him was his solicitor, Mr. Thornby, pale and sweating. Across from them stood a stranger dressed in rich blue fabric with gold at the cuffs. He looked pleased, almost amused, and spoke rapidly in a smooth musical language Emily recognized at once. Italian. Her heart skipped. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, teaching her pronunciation by candlelight. The stranger gestured broadly, his tone confident. The Duke's face darkened with confusion and anger. Mr. Thornby looked helpless. The stranger suddenly switched to broken English. His words were rough and unclear. "No, translate here. You sign now or I take all tomorrow." Emily's breath caught. She understood enough Italian to know this was serious. The man was speaking of property, of claims and old agreements. He smiled like someone who already believed he had won. The Duke and his solicitor could not understand him fully. They were trapped, unable to argue properly or defend themselves. Emily saw something on the Duke's face she had never seen before: fear. Before she could stop herself, Emily stepped forward. "Your Grace," she said softly. All 3 men turned. The Duke looked at her as if trying to remember whether he had ever seen her before. She curtsied, her heart pounding. "I speak Italian," she said. "If you require a translator, I can help." Silence fell heavy in the hall. "You speak Italian," the Duke said flatly. "Yes, Your Grace. My father was a translator." "Prove it." Emily turned to the stranger and spoke in Italian, clear and calm, asking his name and his purpose. The man blinked in surprise, then smiled. He introduced himself as Count Alessandro Reiki from Naples. Emily translated his words carefully. "It's so..." The Count claimed ownership of Thornhill Manor based on documents signed decades earlier by the Duke's grandfather. The color drained from the Duke's face. Emily continued translating as the Count explained. The manor had been used as payment for a gambling debt of £50,000. The deadline to repay had passed 3 months earlier. The Count produced a thick folder filled with papers and official seals. Mr. Thornby made a choking sound. The Count spoke again. Generous now. He would allow 1 week for review before taking possession. 1 week to lose everything. The Duke stood frozen. Then he turned to Emily, really looked at her for the first time. "You will come with me," he said. "You will translate every word of these documents." Emily nodded. The Count left with confidence, murmuring something in Italian meant only for her ears. He hinted that once the manor was his, she would be more useful. Emily did not translate that. In the Duke's study, Emily sat in a leather chair she had cleaned many times but never used. The fire burned low as she read aloud page after page of Italian legal text. The story unfolded slowly. The gambling night, the debt, the contract. Then Emily paused. "There is a clause," she said. "The debt could be forgiven if fraud or cheating could be proven." Hope flickered in the Duke's eyes, but it was fragile. The events were over 30 years old. Witnesses were likely dead. "My grandfather kept journals," the Duke said. "If there was wrongdoing, he may have written about it." "I can help search," Emily said quietly. He studied her. "Why would you help me?" she answered honestly. "Because it matters. This place matters. And losing it this way is wrong." Something shifted in his expression. They worked until night fell. When Emily finally left, her mind raced. She had stepped out of the shadows. She had been seen, and she feared there would be no way back. Emily barely slept that night. The wind pressed against the small window of her room, and every sound of the old house settling made her heart jump. By morning, she dressed in her plainest work clothes and carried a lamp down to the east wing where the estate archives were kept. The room was cold and windowless, lined with shelves that reached the ceiling. Dust lay thick on boxes and books untouched for years. She worked slowly and carefully, opening journals from the years surrounding the gambling debt. The old Duke's handwriting filled page after page with details of dinners, crops, guests, and weather. Hours passed with nothing but disappointment. Emily's hope began to thin, but she forced herself to keep going. Then she found it. A journal dated April 17, 94 lay open on the table. One entry made her hands tremble as she read. The old Duke had written that Count Ricci's father cheated at cards. He wrote that he had been drunk, desperate, and afraid. He admitted he signed papers in a language he barely understood. He called himself a fool and begged forgiveness for gambling away his family's future. Emily sat back, her breath shallow. This was not proof yet, but it was truth. And truth could lead to justice. She marked the page and kept reading. Another entry spoke of rumors. Antonio Ricci was known as a cheat in certain circles. Protected by wealth and foreign courts, he could not be challenged easily. Emily gathered the journals just as footsteps echoed behind her. "So," a smooth voice said, "the little maid becomes a scholar."
Emily turned sharply. Count Ricci stood in the doorway, calm and confident.
"These archives are private," she said. He smiled. "Soon they will be mine." He stepped closer, his eyes flicking to the open journal. Emily moved instinctively to block it. "You think dusty words can save Thornhill," he said. "Even if my father cheated, the contract stands." He leaned closer. "But I admire your loyalty. When I take this estate, you could serve me instead."
"I would not ignore your talents."
Emily's voice stayed steady.
"I will not serve you," he laughed softly. "Loyalty to a losing man is a poor investment." Then he left, his footsteps unhurried. Emily's hands shook as she gathered the evidence and hurried to the Duke's study. He listened closely as she explained everything. His jaw tightened at the Count's intrusion. "He is trying to frighten you," the Duke said. "And you," Emily replied. They reviewed the journal entries together. Hope returned, cautious but real. The Duke ordered letters written at once to Italian courts and the Clarence Club in London. Emily translated every word, but whispers had begun in the house. The housekeeper warned the Duke of gossip, a maid spending hours alone with him, closed doors, raised voices, appearances. Emily offered to step back. "I cannot," the Duke said. "I need you." The words struck deeper than he knew. That evening, as rain darkened the windows, the Duke spoke without looking at her. "I have lived by duty alone for years. I forgot how to see people. You remind me. Emily felt something dangerous grow between them, something neither dared name. The next morning brought news. The Clarence Club still had records from the night of the card game. Copies were on the way. Then Count Raichi returned. His tone had changed. He knew they were investigating. He offered a bargain. Surrender now and leave with dignity. Fight and be ruined. The Duke wavered. Emily did not. This is who you are, she said. A man who does not surrender. Her words steadied him. That night, fire broke out in the stables. Flames climbed into the sky as servants shouted and horses screamed. The Duke took command, hauling water, shouting orders, saving lives. Emily saw a man watching from the shadows, a footman, paid by the Count. The traitor was seized and taken away, but damage had already been done. When the fire died, Emily ran to the archives. Count Reiki was there. Burning papers. You are too late, he said calmly. Before she could speak, the Duke appeared. This time, Reichi's smile faltered. The Duke spoke of sealed testimony, of Italian magistrates, of proof arriving by morning. For the first time, fear crossed the Count's face. When silence returned, Emily and the Duke stood amid ash and smoke. Thornhill still stood, but the fight was not over yet. The night after the fire felt heavier than any that came before it. Smoke still clung to the air, and the smell of burned wood drifted through the open windows of Thornhill Manor. Emily sat in the Duke's study with her hands folded in her lap, too tired to speak, too restless to leave. Across from her, the Duke stood near the hearth, staring into the low flames as if searching for answers there. Neither of them spoke for a long time. At last, the Duke broke the silence. If the evidence arrives tomorrow as promised, Count Raichi will be finished here. Emily nodded. And if it does not? He turned to her then, and she saw the truth in his eyes. Then I will still fight. But I will not pretend anymore. I am afraid, Emily. I have been afraid since this began. She rose slowly and stepped closer. You are allowed to be afraid. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. It means standing anyway. His gaze softened. You speak as if you have always known this. I learned it by surviving, she said simply, by being invisible and still enduring. Before he could reply, a knock came at the door. Mr. Piqua Thornby entered, breathless and pale, holding a sealed packet in his hands. Your Grace, it has arrived. The Duke took the packet, broke the seal, and unfolded the papers inside. Emily watched his face closely as he read. At first, his expression was tight and guarded. Then his eyes widened. Then slowly, relief washed over him like dawn after a long night. It is all here, he said quietly. The sealed testimony, signed statements. Records of bribes. Evidence that the contract was forced through fraud. Emily let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. We have won, Mr. Thornby said, awe in his voice. The Duke looked at Emily. No, we have not lost. By midday, the authorities arrived. Count Raichi was summoned and presented with the evidence. His confidence crumbled under the weight of proof. His threats became protests. His protests turned to silence. By evening, he was gone. Thornhill Manor was safe. The house felt different the next morning, lighter, as if it had exhaled after holding its breath for years. Servants whispered in corners, but their voices carried relief instead of fear. Repairs began on the stables. Horses were moved to temporary shelter. Life resumed, careful but hopeful. Emily stood at the edge of the garden, watching workers move across the grounds. She should have felt triumph. Instead, uncertainty pressed in. The Duke found her there. It is over, he said. Yes, she replied. It is. He studied her face. You sound as if you believe something has ended. Something has, Emily said softly. This work, this closeness. You no longer need me. The words hung between them. I need you, he said at once. She shook her head. Not as you did before. I was useful, convenient, a solution to a problem. You were never just that, he said firmly. Emily turned to face him. Then what am I? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he said, "Do you remember the first time you spoke to me? In the entrance hall?" She nodded. "I was terrified. I was humiliated," he said. A duke unable to defend his own home.
And then you stepped forward?
A woman I had never truly seen. He took a breath. "That was my failing, not yours." Emily's voice trembled. "Our worlds are not the same. They do not have to be," he replied. Silence fell again, but this time it was different. Charged, fragile. "Emily," he said carefully, "I have spent my life believing duty required loneliness. That rank demanded distance. That feeling was weakness." He looked at her with unguarded honesty. "You proved me wrong." Her heart pounded. "Your Grace, do not," he said gently. "Not now." He reached for her hand but stopped just short, giving her time to step away. She did not. "I will not insult you by pretending this would be easy," he said. "The world will not accept it kindly. Society will judge us. My family will protest. Your life will change forever." Emily swallowed. "So will yours." "Yes," he said. "And I choose that." Her breath caught. "You choose scandal. I choose truth," he said. "I choose the woman who stood beside me when I had nothing but fear and stubborn hope." Tears filled her eyes. "I am afraid," she admitted. "So am I," he said. "But for the first time, I do not want to be brave alone." He finally took her hand. Emily felt the weight of the moment press down on her. The past years of silence, the nights of loneliness, the belief that she was meant to remain unseen. She thought of her father, of words as bridges.
Yes,
she said. The word was quiet, but it changed everything. They married a week later in the small chapel on the grounds. There was no grand celebration, no crowded pews, only a handful of witnesses in the soft light of stained glass casting color across stone walls. Emily wore a simple dress. The Duke wore no decorations beyond his name. When they spoke their vows, there was no doubt in either of them. The world outside Thornhill reacted exactly as expected. Some were shocked, some were cruel, some refused to visit or write, others watched closely, waiting for the marriage to fail. It did not. Emily learned quickly. She learned how to host, how to speak, how to hold her ground with grace. She did not pretend to be something she was not. She carried herself with quiet strength, the same strength that had carried her through invisibility. The Duke stood beside her always, not in front, not behind. Together, they rebuilt the stables. Together, they walked the estate at dawn. Together, they listened to tenants and servants alike. And sometimes, in the evenings, they sat in the library while rain tapped against the windows, reading aloud in different languages, voices blending, words bridging every distance that once stood between them. Emily was no longer invisible. She was seen, and she was home.